Hello, everyone in podcast land. This is Dr. John. I'm excited about today. We have a great set of people here that I've invited to come on. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of the guest speakers today. Now, one of the things that I probably didn't ask is if you do want anyone to contact you, and feel free to put your contact information on the chat. But after I give them your info, they probably end up searching you out anyway. So that's how they do it with me. So it's amazing what the internet could do. So if you do have a certain email or address you want them to contact my speakers, feel free to answer, put it on the chat. But so I'm going to start with Michaela. Miss Michaela Devins is a C4, C5 quadriplegic who has completed her master's degree in professional counseling from the University of Penn. Since graduating, she has worked in the community mental health in Philadelphia, Boston, and as an individual, focusing primarily on clients with anxiety, depression, and PTSD. She dedicated her time in advocacy for people with spinal cord injury, serving as consumer advisory board for the Neuralink since 2020. She also works with the United Spinal Association, mental health initiative meant to provide education, dispel stigma through social media and blog posts. And I've read a few of Michaela's posts. It's pretty good. Michaela, you want to smile for everyone here? And so that's Michaela. Now, we have as well as Dave Estrada. Dave Estrada is the program manager for Spalding New England Regional Spinal Cord Injury Center of Boston, in Boston, Mass. Dave has a unfortunately, Dave has to be a lawyer. You know how much I love lawyers here. But so Dave has his law degree from Northeastern University, vice president of Greater Boston chapter of United Spinal Associations as well. He's a training peer mentor, works closely with staff at Spalding. He's a co-chair, the Disability Awareness and Disability Task Force for Mass General Brigham. He is involved in the Job Lab at Spalding, which trains and hires people with disabilities for employment, which I love to hear because I do feel that employment is one of the greatest avenues of getting out of this funk. He's a former employee of Resource Group of Employees with Disabilities at Mass General Brigham. And lastly, we have Dr. Ten Hayward. She's a practicing clinical psychologist in the Silicon Valley, California person here. She did her master's and bachelor's at Stanford and her PhD at Harvard. I'm telling you, we have some great, bright people here. I feel a little small right now. She's completed a postdoctorate in clinical psychology. She has done humanitarian work, improving lives of people with disabilities around the world, taking her wheelchair and mobility equipment under resource countries, including Mongolia and Costa Rica. She has she taught positive psychology-based interventions in Thailand after the Southeast Asia tsunami and working with genocide survivors in Africa. She also spoke at the United Nations. Well, she's been around over the world. So I know one of the things that you mentioned that I sort of erased, but I do remember you've been in 41 countries, right?
42.
42. Okay, wait. Okay, 42. Are you one ahead of or behind your friend?
One ahead.
You're one ahead. Friend, and she has a competition going on with her friend. Okay, so you are 40 countries ahead of me. So obviously I have not gone. Wait a minute. I did go into Canada, so that is a different country, right? That's that puts me at 3. So
there you go.
But all right. So welcome everyone. Hello. Did I mess up any of the intro, or did I miss anything that was that I should have said that you're involved with that I should have and could have said?
All good.
That was good.
All good.
They gave me a thumbs up. Everyone gives me okay. So can you tell me now? I just gave you a professional. So can you tell me a little bit more about your personal life and your professional history, however you want to integrate it, that makes sense since you're with your injury. So Dr. Hayward, would you mind starting since you're on my top left of my screen here?
I'd be happy to. Thank you for having us, Dr. John. And I was injured when I was 16 years old. I was a junior in high school, and I was in a car accident in Hawaii where I was going to a private boarding school at the time and to compete for their track and cross country team. So athletics were highly important to me at that time. And it was the weekend after the state track meet. And the girl who was driving my car was crazy high school driving, and she was going about 90 miles an hour and hit another car on a winding mountain road. And I was thrown out and hit my head on the pavement and was in a coma for about 10 days, wasn't meant to wake up. And if I did, the doctors told my parents that I would have such severe brain damage that I wouldn't be able to speak or breathe on my own. And fortunately, I still made it to Stanford and Harvard. So none of that was true. And for me, it was a major professional catalyst. It really helped me clarify and consolidate my interests. I had always been interested in psychology, but beyond that, I didn't have a focus. And so after my injury, I became really, really fascinated with resilience and a newer concept called post-traumatic growth. The idea that really bad things can have really good effects. And that was what I had experienced. Unlike the predictions that I was told, when I was in the hospital, that I would be depressed and abuse substances and want to commit suicide, that wasn't my experience. And so I became really interested in researching what the components for happiness were after significant adversity. And that became the basis for my research and now my clinical work.
I like that post-traumatic growth. I have not heard of that. I'm always learning something. So we're going to have to talk a little bit afterwards so I can learn a little bit more. Great, great. Dave.
Yes, sir.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I had an injury when I was 23 in 1995. I was a senior undergrad in college and also a Boston police cadet. I was going to be a Boston police officer and had a motorcycle, was riding my motorcycle home one night from school, it's day school, and then my night shift at the police department, and going through an intersection and was hit by a car and became an instant T3 complete paraplegic. And so I wound up in rehab for 3 months at Boston Medical Center and didn't have a good time at the age 23 in rehab whatsoever. But seemed like enough time for me to kind of just learn wheelchair skills and my activities of daily living, what they call the ADLs. And so, and one of the things that when you're 23, I was, detached from my parents. My parents came and visited me in the hospital and said, why don't you come move back home with us? And I said, no way, I'm not going in reverse. So luckily, the college that I was attending undergrad had an accessible dorm room. So the day I was discharged from rehab, I moved back onto campus. A week later, I was back in classes, finishing up my degree in criminal justice, and then went back to work about 7 months later, and then just kept moving and got into wheelchair racing. And like you said, I took the LSATs and was accepted to a bunch of law schools and attended Northeastern, and just kept on working into the position that I'm in now. So I've worked multiple jobs at one time, and continue to work multiple jobs, and just keep busy and have a pretty positive outlook on life and life after injury, and have a lot of friends. And as I mentioned in my bio, I strongly support peer mentoring and support groups, and obviously counseling when you can get it. But it's that first year or two that we all know that's the real challenge after injury to sort of try and overcome this and move on.
Well, as you see, a common theme going on here is schooling and employment so far, and I think we're going to all talk a little bit about that more. And lastly, the best, Michaela, can you introduce your little bit self?
Yes. So I broke my neck when I was 19, diving into a shallow pool. That was about 12 years ago. Before that, I was a vocal performance and music education major. I went back about 8 months after my injury to finish my degree in music education. But as Dave just touched on, those first few years after injury can be incredibly difficult. And once I finished my coursework, I found that the grief of losing my singing voice and my ability to play instruments made it very painful for me to want to pursue a career in that. So, you know, in the meantime, I got a master's in literacy education because I really thought that I wanted to be in the classroom. Concurrently with that, I was also going to therapy for the first time in my life and exploring my own mental health journey, realizing that I've struggled with depression and anxiety my entire life, and that the injury really just exacerbated what was already there in a big way. And so working through all of that and having a sounding board and someone that was this objective outside party and could reflect things back to me was hugely transformative, and really impacted me in a way that I thought, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm passionate about. So I went back to school again and completed my master's in professional counseling, and really just love working at the community level. Typically, you know, with folks that they're not paying out of pocket for you know, $100 an hour, right? Like we take all insurance at the agency that I work for. And so we get some really complicated, complex cases, people that have a lot of complex trauma and co-occurring diagnoses. And that work is incredibly difficult, but I find it incredibly rewarding. And seeing stories of post-traumatic growth, as Dr. Hayward touched on over and over again, it's just such a privilege to be on that journey with the clients that I work with. So, yeah.
Great, thank you, Michaela. And Michaela's an awesome dog that may be walking around in the back once in a while. And I told her, look, I have to tell her about my dog going, you know, having accidents in Macy's. So, but that's a whole nother story. I think I actually said that in one of my podcasts already. So the podcast people, everyone out there, I'd like to ask the first question out there is, if you have any questions for our panel and any specific individual, feel free to send it in our chat or post a question in the privacy. I think you have that option. But first question for everyone is that, as you know, so the panel is made up of paras and quads. I intentionally asked to have my paraplegics on, even though I get very jealous of the things they do physically, but I was willing to let my guard down and actually ask them to come on. And because I do know they have something to say, not a lot, but they have something worth to say for us. So those out there, are you a para or a quad out there? If you have a level, or are you an incomplete? So that's my first question to my listeners. So if you put that on your chat, if you let us know what's your function. But I am going to ask, and anyone can answer this question. After your accident, can you give me sort of one priority thing that made the difference for you in your road to recovery? Is there one thing that jumps out at you about your history that made sense as you look back as 2020 hindsight, that, oh, thank God this happened to me? feel free. I didn't want to jump in.
I can speak to that because there was really one thing that made the most significant difference in my recovery. And this piggybacks on what Dave was saying about the importance of peer support. When I was injured, as I said, I was injured in Hawaii, but then I was flown to Seattle, which was close to where my family lived, and was in the acute rehab there for 4 months. And then I was discharged and I went down to Southern California to an outpatient clinic. And when I was in Southern California, I met this whole large group of, at the time I was 17, so sort of young, fun, kind of hip, beautiful people who used wheelchairs. And they were all athletic and they all had boyfriends and girlfriends and drove like lowered Range Rovers, and just a really fun group of people who had worked it out, right? They were post-injury longer than I was. So they had worked out how to do life, how to travel. Most of them travel, you know, incredibly often around the world. And they worked out how to do sports, and they water skied and they jet skied and they snow skied and they did everything. And that was the turning point for me. I realized before that I had held the belief for a couple months that I wouldn't be happy again until I was walking. And I had an incomplete injury, a T4, but sensory incomplete. It's pretty much motor complete, but I didn't know that yet. And so I was still hoping that I would get more motor use back. But I met all of these people who were in exactly the same situation that I was and had these amazing lives. And they were quads, paras, you name it, all different levels of injury. And that was really what allowed me to turn the corner and realize that life is really what you make it. And that being in a wheelchair, yeah, was challenging, but it wasn't necessarily a bad challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Hayward. You know, if you're going to break your back or your neck, you got to do it in Hawaii. I mean, come on. It's Jesus.
Absolutely.
If you want to do it, you got to do it in Hawaii, right? But Dave, you mentioned about mentoring right after you're in.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have a common theme there, or is it something different?
Yeah, no, so when I got out of the hospital and went back on campus in college, I think 2 weeks later, I went back to the gym, and there was a guy that worked in the gym that was helping me out. And he said, "Oh, I want to introduce you to somebody." And in wheels another paraplegic, and he was living on campus, and he had gone out to the University of Illinois, which has a huge disabled sports wheelchair racing basketball program. And but he was from the Boston area, so he moved back and went to Northeastern, and ironically was living the floor above me in the accessible dorm room that I lived in. So he showed me what I tried to learn in rehab, you know, for 3 months, the whole bowel bladder issues and wheelchair skills, driving. He just was like, "Hey, hop in my car. Let's go for a drive." And I in the driver's seat. So that was my first, introduction to hand controls and driving. And we're still friends. I was actually at his house this past weekend, hand cycling, 28 years later. We're still good, really, really good friends, and, talk about joking and laughing and doing stuff, crazy stuff, that, you do with your good friends. And so I became a peer mentor a couple of years after my injury, and just started doing, what he did to me was just, trying to get people motivated and after injury, and it's those first 1 or 2 years that I think are critical, and you need the most support. And, having a peer mentor or support group available to you is uplifting and helpful.
Yeah. Dave, I didn't get that peer mentoring coming out of McGee. I'm not downplaying McGee at all. I love McGee, but I had a lot of people who were injured at the same time as my age. So we sort of got together, hung, and sort of kept each other going. But I didn't really meet anybody that was any years out. 'Cause maybe I was in denial. Maybe I didn't want to meet. I didn't want to. Maybe I didn't want to have any friends that was in a wheelchair because I didn't think I was going to be in a wheelchair forever.
Yeah, and the one thing I can say, when I first met him, I was hesitant, so I didn't really want to hang out with him at first, and he was persistent, and I've heard that over the years, and I know it. A lot of people don't want to associate with other people that with a disability or wheelchair users at first, after right after their injury, and like Shen alluded to, you just want to walk again and recover and get back to what you had. But he grew on me, and I'm glad he was persistent, because I initially didn't want that that close contact or that association, and it grew, and part of it was just proximity, because he lived above me, and he would come and knock on my door and be like, hey, let's go for a wheel or whatever. You like sports, you want to get back into sports, let's do some wheelchair racing. So it was that kind of push. And I know a lot of people do need that. Otherwise, you do get isolated and depressed if you don't have that connection or contact.
So any peer mentors listening out there right now, you got to be a nag. You got to be
Yes.
in their face. You got to be, even though the person may initially be resistant to that. And so whatever it is, to be a good peer mentor, seems like you just got to be a persistent, like a mosquito, right? Almost.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm only calling you a mosquito because you're a parent, Dave. That's the reason I called you a mosquito. Right? Okay. Now I'm going to come to someone that actually I can relate. So, Michaela, so the nicer part of this panel here.
For me, it was different because as a quadriplegic, I didn't have the same kind of independence, and I did have to move backward. I did move back in with my parents. And that was difficult. And I also grew up in a very isolated area in the Adirondack Mountains. So I didn't have a community of peers. I didn't even know how to get connected with other wheelchair users. I was very much alone in that sense. All of my friends in undergrad were still continuing with their education, and here I was, moved back into my parents' house, isolated, depressed, and the focus for many years after my injury was to regain function. And I think two things really were incredibly helpful to me during that time. One was having friends and family that allowed me the space to talk about what the internal struggle that I was experiencing, because I put a really good outward face on things. When I went out in public, when friends did come by, I put on a really happy face, like, see, I'm good, everything's fine. And inside I was struggling immensely. I was suicidal. I had the grief and the sadness, felt like I felt like I was drowning every day. And having friends that I trusted, including my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and my best friend, they gave me the space to talk about those things without judgment, without, it was a little bit of like a taste of therapy before I ever got there, having a non-judgmental space just to feel heard. That made a huge difference. And then a physical therapist that I had at one point in these first few years said to me, it's fine that you want to focus on recovery. I think that you should always be taking care of your body and seeking out ways to exercise or be active. Like, that's not something I will ever tell you not to do, but you also need to find a balance and continue to live your life. And just hearing that, I feel like gave me the freedom to say, yeah, it's okay that I want other things in my life besides spending every waking hour trying to get back to where I was. So giving myself space to pursue other things, to figure out, what does this life look like now? How do I adapt? How do I find things that I love? How do I engage with the world it allowed me space to explore that, which, you know, really changed everything for me.
Wow. Michaela, I'm hearing everything and I'm like, wow, there's bits and pieces that I love we could spend hours on. One of the things I want to point out is that there is, I jokingly pick on the paras, but in some ways, if you just notice what they've said today, they have so many more options, obviously, because of their physical ability. And with that mindset, they do have other things to think about. For Michaela and I, yeah, I went back home as well. It was about focusing on just being functional and not to be relying on too many people. I'm guessing Dr. Hayward and Dave is that you were a little bit different. You could figure out probably about being able to be able and functional on your own, but you were just trying to figure out how to integrate into life, doing the things you used to. Whereas for us, we were just trying to survive in some set of just getting our ADLs met, our activities of daily living. So you brought that up. What do you think, and again, I have all these questions that I'm thinking in my head to ask, but what is the best way to reach out when Michaela says, look, I was struggling inside, and she came from an area that hadn't, with Dave in Boston and 10 in Southern California. I think you said you were,
Northern now.
Northern California. It sounds like you guys had a lot more things going on than Michaela did. I was somewhat, I was in close to Philadelphia, but what do you think a person needs to do as a first step? I mean, you said peer mentoring, so that's outside in. We have no control of that. So is there something we can do inside out? What does the person need to do from your perspective, personally and professionally, that a person needs to do almost the top three, top few things that you think they need to do after they're at home and or away? What do you think? Any suggestions?
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Michaela, go right ahead.
Go ahead, Michaela.
I've worked with a lot of people that have, and outside of spinal cord injury, that have really debilitating PTSD combined with agoraphobia, combined with, substance abuse. And when you have been in a situation where it feels like there's nothing good in your life, and you work with people who are feeling similarly, it's about starting with even just one thing. Sometimes I talk with my clients about instituting a practice of gratitude, and not to say that you're not recognizing all of the things that really suck, because it doesn't do any good to ignore that or pretend like it doesn't exist. That's invalidating, in fact. But sometimes I've worked with folks and the only thing they can say is, I'm grateful that I woke up today. Okay, that's a start. That's a starting point, right? Where do we go from there? How do we incorporate more things? Mindfulness. Is there an activity that's relatively accessible to you, whatever accessibility means financially, any in any sense of the word, right? Very slowly building, incorporating things into your life. And it's going to look different for every person, of course, but engaging in that process of exploration and not taking on too much at once. Because when you're severely depressed, getting the motivation to even get out of bed can feel impossible. So starting small, making regular, measurable, little baby step goals, and you would be amazed at the progress you can make in a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year. So starting small and just having a sort of tenacity to, if the only thing that gives you joy in a day is taking a walk around the block or rolling around the block, do it. Roll around the block. Don't let anything get in the way of you being able to do that, right? So that's what I would say. It's just starting small and keep going.
Yeah, so small increments, and it sounded like, at least from your perspective, changing your attitude and appreciate a little bit of what you have without without ignoring the fact that you're paralyzed and you're in a wheelchair, an electric chair, but it sort of starts on the top. Dr. Hayward, you were about to say something as well.
Yeah, my thoughts were similar to Michaela's. I think there's a number of things, a number of practices that individuals can implement on their own without regard to what level of function you have. So when I was speaking about post-traumatic growth a second ago, a lot of studies have been done looking at the mechanism. What is it that causes post-traumatic growth as opposed to, say, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? And one of those mechanisms is cognitive processing. That is making sense or building meaning out of whatever has happened in your life. So whether that looks like talking to somebody else to process what you're experiencing, really getting into your feelings, or thinking or writing. Writing has actually been shown to be a very powerful technique post-trauma. There's a book I'd like to recommend. It's by Dr. Jamie Pennebaker. It's called, I'm looking at it across the room, Opening Up by Writing It Down. And it's shown that there's all sorts of physical, mental health benefits simply by writing about your deepest, darkest difficulties. So by putting it into writing, and if you're not able to use, if you don't have the fine motor function to write, you can dictate into a tape recorder. I'm dating myself, but into some sort of recording advice. So simply by processing, thinking about, and expressing what it is you're feeling, it can actually have really beneficial effects. Also, learning to label one's feelings. In psychology world, we call this affective labeling, affective with an A, meaning labeling one's emotions. And there's some neuroscience behind it that shows that the act of labeling, using language, which resides in the prefrontal cortex, or the higher order processing part of your brain, does something to the amygdala, the more reptilian part of your brain, and allows you to regulate your emotions better. So if you want to interrupt like when your amygdala gets hijacked and you're in tears, that simply by labeling what it is you're feeling using this part of your brain, you can bring your emotions down. So those two simple things, the writing and then the effective labeling, have been very powerful techniques in terms of individually led recovery.
I would love to add to that, just because I use that language of prefrontal cortex and amygdala with my adults, but with the kids that I work with, I call it your thinking brain and your lizard brain, which can be a really easy way to think about it. But with writing, if anyone is familiar with the idea of a trauma narrative, that can be an incredibly powerful tool for processing a traumatic experience or experiences. And that writing doesn't have to be a novel. It can be bullet journaling. It can be poetry. It can be a stream of consciousness, right? Like engaging in writing in a way that makes sense for you. Because sometimes when I give that advice to clients, I encourage them to journal, they look at me like, you got to be kidding. Like, I'm not going to do that. So I like to try to encourage folks, like, you can engage in it in different ways as well. It doesn't, you don't have to write a novel.
So what I'm hearing from you is that the lizard brain and the thinking brain, right? So my question is, what's wrong with the lizard?
Nothing's wrong with it.
Nothing's wrong with okay, so lizard's still good. Just need to know when to get the lizard out, right? So
right,
you gotta get your lizard and your thinking brain communicating.
Exactly. More holistically.
Right. Dave, I'm putting you on the spot because I just got a lot of psychobabble going on.
I know you really did.
All these clinicians.
You really did. No, I think that, for me, and it's funny because I was on a panel recently and told them, I was telling the people on the panel what I did, and they weren't familiar with spinal cord injury or disability in terms of how I just made the progression from my accident and the deepest, darkest parts of my life at the age of 23, and how I just kind of climbed back up the ladder. And they said, how'd you do it? How could you do that in such a short period of time after, what happened to you? And my only answer was, that's just the way I'm wired. Everyone is different. Everyone's wired differently. Everyone copes in a different manner. So, going back to what Michaela and Shen just said, you need to figure out what may work for you. And I wholeheartedly agree that a journal, or, if you can't obviously write, then recording, and even more of a simplistic daily journal. You wake up, right, and you take a chronicle of what you've eaten today, and your by the end of the day, your experience of the day, like, oh, I had a crappy day. Somebody took my handicap. I was trying to park and somebody took the handicap spot on me, and walked away. And I shouted at them and they laughed at me, something like that. And just to again, go through a month's worth of a daily journal and just look at it. And I did it, I was given a journal right after my injury by my sister, and there's nothing in it. The journal, I still have it, but I did not, and I refused to see the psychologist when I was inpatient and not in rehab. It was one of those things
Good
where
for you. Me too. I hated him. I hope he's not listening right now, Dr. Uvijis. Yeah. I escaped every one of those sessions if I could.
Yeah. So I mean, but people, again, everyone's different. Everyone processes things differently. And for me, it was just kind of, and I did a journal later. I did it years later after my injury. But again, for me, it was, my internal process was to move forward, to, eventually accept what had happened to me, process it, and then get on with life. And, and a lot of people, I think, with spinal cord injury, not a lot of people, but some people do get involved in their community. I've met plenty of people who had their injury, and 20 years later, they reach out to me and say, hey, I want to volunteer. I want to interact in the community. And I say, where have you been for 20 years? And they're like, I have a wife and kids and a job, and they've never interacted with really anyone else in the spinal cord injured community. So it's kind of fascinating how people, everyone's different and everybody processes things differently.
Guys, like any great production, I have a light in my eye here.
Yeah.
So, but writing. So my first question to my listeners out there is that, is anyone here a journal? Is anyone that's listening right now, those who are not disabled, that's able, a lot of people journal. So I'm curious, does anyone journal back in your days, or do you currently journal at least one point in your life? So, but David, there's a process of, and what jumped out at me, what you're saying today was that there's a process of acceptance. Sometime some people do it quickly, others just takes a while to accept that things aren't going to be the same, and we live on that fantasy that you're going to wake up and everything's going to be fine, right? It did remind me of when I used to skip my psychology sessions. Back in the old days, they actually had those speakers, and they would, announce, they would say, John Chang, please report to the, fourth floor. They knew what fourth floor was. And then, so there's like, nah, he's obviously running away from it again, because he didn't want to go to session. And my therapist would say to me, why do you keep skipping my sessions? I said, because you make me cry. I don't like crying. And you freaking make me cry every time I meet you. And I'm like, And the funny thing is, though, is in my private practice now, it's like I had this little competition in my head. It's like, if I can't get the patient to cry, I haven't done my job today. So it's a weird thing that you reflect back. So now, one of the things, and we're flying through time here, so I want to make sure I ask some of the things, we talked a lot about the initial accident and coping initially. My God, I hate to say it, I'm like post 30 some years now. Dave, how long are you?
Almost 28 years.
Almost 28. And Dr. Hayward,
28.
28. And I mean, McCabe, man, she's a
Wow.
baby here.
Yeah.
Both chronologically and post injury. You're what, 13?
12 years.
12?
post-injury.
See, I'm giving her an extra year, man. See, you're just, so she's a baby, but has it, looking back post 20 years, post 13, are you seeing things differently that you could have done differently earlier on than you should have done to make your life a little better now that you could have done? Like, I still don't do a lot of therapy. It's only been last few months I've started going to therapy once a week again. Whereas I used to go into the rehab when I'm working, and I look in and I see people, they come from the community, they come in and do their electro-stim, they do their swimming, they do all these amazing things. And I'm like, I don't do jack. I mean, I literally do nothing. All the exercise I get is in my brain. And I always felt so guilty. Like, and now I'm 30 some years post injury, I'm like regretting I didn't do as much. So, and the size of my belly shows it. So tell me, in 2020 hindsight, are there anything you could have done differently? Please don't tell me you would have done exactly what you would have done and
No.
not change a thing. Please, I
do think that things, laid themselves out the way that they needed to, but I wish that I could go back to my freshly injured self and really encourage her to not second guess the love that she was being offered, and to not feel so self-conscious, because I let negative body image and low self-esteem post-injury, and I think this, I can't speak to the male perspective, but I think specifically for women, I struggled with body image before my injury, and then post-injury, my body didn't look, not only did it not function the same, it didn't look the same. And that it was something that was a huge barrier for me. I didn't really want to go out. I didn't really want people who knew me before to see me like this, whatever that means. But, I wish that I could just go back and really encourage myself to, if not embrace this body, at least show it some compassion, show it some love, not let it get in the way of me getting out on the dance floor and looking like an idiot, just enjoing my life, because the truth is no one else on the dance floor looks very good either. So,
true.
I will never forget going to a friend's wedding like a couple years after my injury, and I just sat there watching people dance, feeling so sad and so sorry for myself, honestly. And I since have gotten over that, and I know I look ridiculous and I have a great time, even if I'm just bobbing my head, like it doesn't matter. But I wish I could go back to myself at that point and say, what are you doing? Get out there. You only have this one life, and you have been spared, it could have been so much worse, and enjoy it.
And jumping to that, Dr. Hayward, do you have anything from a female perspective as well, or can you add on to that?
Absolutely. I think that's really beautifully put, Michaela. If I could go back to my newly injured self, I think that I would want to, well, I was injured in '94, and at that time there wasn't a very solid understanding of what ableism is and the implications of disability-directed stigma. It was sort of a new concept. The ADA had just passed several years before, and disability wasn't considered part of the diversity conversation yet. And for me, that has been such a healing part of my journey, learning to learning to take the focus off of my disability as the problem and instead put the focus on the fact that there's no elevator or there's no, you know, no signage, or there's not a parking space or a bathroom that I can use. That's the problem. And it's sort of like switching the perspective from a, it's not me, it's you, or two, it's not me, it's you. And realizing that when I'm in parts of the world, like some parts of Southern California, like Irvine, for example, which is very even and flat and manicured and extremely accessible, I don't even notice that I have any difference because everything, the laws are followed. And it just, in my life, is quite easy. And it's only when I'm in parts of the world where the laws aren't followed or there's pushback against you know, inclusion for people with disability, that I realize that my disability is a thing.
Yeah.
And that shows me that it's really not a bad thing having a disability. It's just a difference. And as long as I'm included in the conversation or in the entrance to the building, as long as my needs are thought of, it's really just a difference.
Yeah, I think I noticed that when I went to University of Florida and coming from the north, and I was down there like, oh my God, I can get into every building in this place. And I don't have to go in through the back. I was like,
Right.
whoa, I'm
Yeah.
actually going through the front of doors and buildings where, and I come back up north, like Boston, the old town
Yeah.
there, Dave.
Yeah.
Some places I can get in, but some of them are so historical. It's like, man, all these stupid cobblestones, you know.
Old cities like Philly and Boston are such a nightmare.
Yeah,
I love
nightmare.
living
So-
in the
so it's-
Boston area, but oh my
So it's an
God.
environment thing.
Yeah.
But Dave, how about you? 2020. Not that we can regret things, but I want the newly people hearing these things.
Yeah, no, I think similar to what Shen just mentioned is looking back, and I was injured a year after Shen in 1995, and things were much different then in terms of, again, ableism, which wasn't even a term back then. As I mentioned, I was a Boston police cadet employed by the Boston Police Department, was going to be a police officer. And of course, after my injury, I could no longer pass the physical fitness exam that would have allowed me to be a police officer. So it was one of those tough decisions. And I had met somebody actually who had been hired to the Boston Police Department and then fired from the Boston Police Department because he actually spent some time in a psychiatric facility back in the, I'm going to say in the 70s, and didn't reveal that when he became a police officer. So he was subsequently fired from the police department for lying on his application. And he turned around and sued the police department and won, got his job back. And he was pretty encouraging to me to say, hey, you can still become a police officer. Pay no attention to the wheelchair. You can still do it. You should talk to an attorney. Of course, this is before I became an attorney. But no, I'm still, and then another case where it happened again years later, a gentleman who was deaf in one ear, didn't put it on his application, became a police officer, was fired for lying on his application when they found out he was deaf in one ear, turned around, sued the police department and got his job back. So there are instances again where, yeah, exactly. Right, Michaela, you think they'd learn.
You're making me want to be a cop now.
Yeah. Everybody wants to be
at
one,
least
right?
at least in Boston.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, so you're saying is you need to go after it, even though it may be obvious in front that you have a limitation, but also you what's the word? I don't know. It's like you have to convince the people who are on the other side who are not disabled. And
Yes.
sometimes it does take a lawsuit. Unfortunately, I hate to say that, but that was a little different experience when I was applying to med school. They were asking me all these, can you do didactics? Can you do all these things? And I was like, no, and no. But you didn't ask for those things during your application, and when you gave me the interview, so it's not my fault I can't get in your room because you guys didn't figure it out. But that's a whole nother story. So I'm asking the listeners, how many years post-injury are you, and that are listening on a podcast there? Or do we have, I saw that, Tom says he's 49. So we have a few people that are up there like us when it comes to post-injury. But great. Let me address some of these as I'm trying to make sure we're following some time here. So, and a lot of these things already have been discussed in our talks. One of the questions I asked in pre-registration was, if you're struggling with a good quality of life, what is that? What is causing that? And, we talk about mental health. We have 3 counselors here. What is the easiest way? Because Dave said that, he didn't want to talk to them. I said I didn't want to talk to them. I don't know how about you two if you wanted to talk to a psychologist in the beginning. I know Michaela mentioned that it was the first time she actually been in a psychology, room. Me too. So how do we get, in a hospital, you have to see them. It's part of the team. You can ignore them like I did as much, which I wish I didn't, but you can ignore them. But what is the best way if you're outside in the community to say, man, I need help?
I don't know that there's one best way.
Well, give me some suggestions.
It's a different journey for everyone, but something that I think is a barrier for a lot of folks is trying out therapy, meeting with one therapist, deciding you don't like them, and because they're not the right fit for you, you just write off therapy altogether. Like,
Yep.
It doesn't work, it's not for me. When in reality, therapy is it's very intimate and personal in a lot of ways, right? You're sharing things with your therapist that you might not have shared with anyone else in your life, right? There has to be a basis of trust there, and there has to be a good rapport. You have to have a good relationship with your therapist. So it might take a while to find someone who is the right fit. And that's where perseverance comes in, and advocating for yourself. Maybe saying, this isn't working for me, I want to switch to a different therapist, or being really upfront with the therapist that you do have and saying, listen, I don't like it when you do this. Can we talk about it? Right? And some people might not be that assertive or might find it difficult to be that straightforward or have that kind of conversation. But I know I, as a clinician, always really welcome that from my clients, right? Like, what am I doing that's not working for you? Let's talk about that. So just knowing that if it doesn't work out with one therapist, that doesn't mean that therapy doesn't work. It just means that you haven't found the right therapist yet.
Right. I agree with you. Some clients will not probably tell you how bad you suck,
Yes.
and when in my training of therapists, including my own practice, I always say, how am I doing? Tell me what I'm doing. Are we walking this together, or do I really suck? And they laugh at that, but then they usually give it to me. So, but because I'm open to that, they're usually stay hanging out because I'm willing to take that feedback. How about you? How about you to get that mental health help? Any suggestions?
It's interesting that you're asking this, because this was actually what Dave and I started talking about recently, which is what brought us to meet you, Dr. John. There is a shortage of, I think, mental health professionals who are trained to work with folks with disabilities, or who have the sort of disability affirmative awareness. And I think that it's really important for individuals, when they're looking for a therapist, to ask all the questions. Ask the therapist if they have experience with folks with disabilities, what they think about different issues, because it is such an intimate and personal relationship and can be so transformative. And you have every right to go through as many therapists as you want before you find the one who really is educated and whose heart is in the place that you need it to be in. For myself, after my injury, I was forced to talk to the psychologist in the hospital. And unfortunately, he was really terrible. He was the one that told me that I should expect to be angry and then abuse substances. And for about 2 years, I'd probably want to kill myself. And it was so foreign. It's so different than what I was experiencing. I mean, some parts were in the right direction, but not really. So that really turned me off of therapy for some time. And until I found actually a massage therapist who did physical treatments with me. And I just started talking to her about my emotional experiences and ended up speaking with her for several years. After that, she became my sort of emotional therapist, even though she was trained as a massage therapist. So I think that the need is really great to find somebody who can be an objective third party to what you're experiencing, but always make sure that that objective third party is in alignment with what you're looking for, because you do have that right to say no to the people who are offered to you.
You know, first of all, did you tell that person he sucked?
Yeah, don't you love when a therapist tells you how you should feel?
Right. No, I was like a 16-year-old just woken up from a coma and
Right,
had
right,
no idea what my life was going to look
right.
like.
So you
He
didn't
had a
say
lot
he
of power.
sucked then, right?
Yeah.
Oh no. Mm-mm.
I had a similar experience, Jen. The mental health professional I saw initially after my injury, I was like, this is what therapy is? This sucks. Like, I didn't go back to therapy for 5 years.
Right.
And I think that I really struggled because of that.
Yeah, it sounded like you had a rough time in that initial few years. And
Mhm.
Dave, did you have a bad therapist experience too? I'm
You
I'm
know,
starting to feel sad about our field here.
no, I actually, again, I kind of waved off therapy and rehab, and my therapist was my mentor, and kind of still is. I don't do regular therapy. I think when I get overwhelmed, it's usually because I'm too busy, work wise. And then when I kind of, I go through these kind of highs and lows in terms of work stress and needing to vent. And in terms of the injury, again, I'll be 51 years old in January and 28 years post-injury. So we're all aging with injury as well. And so I'm guessing, in the short term, I'll need to start talking to somebody about some of the limitations I'm encountering with aging and spinal cord injury, which is probably a whole nother topic for discussion. But no, if you can't find somebody there, I would go to friends, family, peer mentor support groups. There's always, there shouldn't be alternatives in my opinion. There should be somebody you can go and see professionally. But if there aren't, there are other alternatives, other options for you.
We are running out of time, and so I'm going to try to wrap up a little bit of what we talked about today. First of all, I want to really thank Dr. Hayward. I want to thank Dave and Michaela, the time spent with your personal and professional insight. It was truly, truly awesome. And the things, every time I think I know everything about everything in psychology and spinal cord injury, of course, I get someone comes in and brings me a little different twist, a different look. So that's the beauty. I think that's one of my strengths, is that I know I suck sometimes. So therefore I constantly learning and constantly trying to be a better person. My goal for this podcast is to just share our experience and give it a professional twist. I'm definitely not here to have all of you listeners think that we know everything. We know bits and parts of some things. And so Michaela would know probably some issues better than I do, and Dr. Hayward and Dave. So feel free to reach out to them. And if you have specific questions to them. I know some of you have other topics I want to talk about: driving, electric vans. I don't know if I keep asking if there's electric vans, but there's none out there that I'm aware of. Flights, I hate flying, but that's a whole nother thing. And maybe next month when we have, I think one of our guests is even listening, Spencer. I was trying to figure out how to travel. I said that in my last talk for an organization in New York. And so I started Googling places, and I ended up seeing Spencer. So Spencer is a quad that does travel experiences, and he's going to help me out a little bit next month on our talk about what to think about for as a quad. Now Paris, man, again, they pop wheels and they pop down steps, and
I
I
just-
just get a little jealous of what they do. And there's the puppy. So, but
Yeah, there's Chicory. I just
yeah.
put my email in the chat, and also Ireland is very disability friendly. I just spent 10 days there in September and it was wonderful. So,
wow, wow. And did you fly?
yes, I
You
did.
can swim there? Okay, all right. So I hate flying, man. It always scares me. They just
I know the
destroy my
flying is
chair.
really the worst part.
Yeah, it just destroys my chair every time I go. So thank you, everyone. And maybe we'll if down the road, if I have another panel, you'd be willing, able, interested, and coming back again. I hope so. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.